So again, this is the Neighborhood Purposes Grants, Expectations, Philosophies, and Pitfalls session in the 2021 Congress of Neighborhoods. And I am Conrad Starr. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so you can see everybody who wants to show their screen. And I see that we've been joined by our other panelists. That is wonderful. We hope that this will be a lively discussion, including our attendees today. We've assembled a number of panelists who are well-versed in the neighborhood purposes grants, and I hope that we get a robust conversation going. I think that's the catchphrase of the day, robust conversation. So let me first introduce everyone. I'm Conrad Starr. I'm from the Greater Wilshire Neighborhood Council, and I have never sat on an NPG committee. Most of the NPG experience I have is from voting with my board and also from attending other neighborhood council meetings. And I've seen some quite a bit of activity this year. And last, with the coronavirus pandemic, we found that a lot of neighborhood councils had different budgets than they did in the past. Perhaps they no longer had some of their meeting space expenses or even some of their administrative expenses. Things certainly changed when we shifted over to Zoom. Some neighborhood councils put food out for their attendees, refreshments for their attendees at their meetings. Well, we don't do that these days. So neighborhood purposes grants became a way that we could spend surplus funds. And certainly folks who are new to the neighborhood council system might think that this is normal, though others of us know that we are in this new normal, this temporary normal. Anyway, that was sort of the inspiration for this session, that it was a good time to talk about NPGs. We may see our budgets change as we shift back to in-person. And so, so I've invited a number of folks to join this conversation. So I'll just look at the pictures on the screen and tell you who they are. One is Dave Brown, and Dave Brown is from North Hills West Neighborhood Council. And I'll let everyone introduce themselves when they join the conversation. Ash Kramer is from Greater Cypress Park Neighborhood Council. Christine Mills is from Elysian Valley Riverside Neighborhood Council. And Matt Wersinger is from Del Rey Neighborhood Council. And then of course, there's all of you. So we hope that you'll join the conversation as well. So let me first ask Christine. I'm just gonna pick her out. She's the last one to join this group of panelists. So let me just ask Christine. Christine, if you close your eyes and I say neighborhood purposes grants, what comes to mind?
Efficiency. I was like quickly getting money into my community, like just an injection of. I've worked at Sorry, I shouldn't say too much.
Well, so you're talking about process. So sounds like the process of the NPG process is something that comes to mind for you. So tell me about your neighborhood council's recent experience with NPGs and why process is the first thing that comes to mind.
Sure. So I live in the Elysian Valley, and part of the reason I'm brand new to neighborhood council work.
Where is Elysian Valley? For those who've never heard of it.
Elysian Valley, a lot of people call it Frogtown. It's not Frogtown. I mean, that's a nickname, but we are underneath, like down the hill from Dodger Stadium, along the LA River, in between Atwater and Highland Park. We're flanked by freeways. We've got the 110, the 5, and the 2. And we've got the MetroLink central maintenance facilities putting out a lot of diesel. So I've been very involved in air quality issues in my community prior to joining our neighborhood council. And I think I say efficiency just because I've worked in like arts and education most of my life. And, you know, I've done so much work for free because funding takes a lot of time. And sometimes you just, in my experience, will be like, forget it, let's just do the work. And to be able to access with such ease this amount of money is just stunning to me, how the shortcut to getting things into your community, having done community work for years with no funding. And what I say efficiency because our board was elected with the elections back in April. And then because of our bylaws state that the new board is seated at the very next meeting. So we were elected, we were seated, and we inherited $42,000 unspent funds. And we agreed like at our first meeting, that it mattered to us. That's the only thing we could do was like, and so I volunteered to do treasure. I did all my training before even being seated. I did everything I could to be ready with the financials. And then we just got this stuff done. We agreed as a board that we were going to have a special meeting. We put out a call for grants. And I thought like, oh man, nobody's going to respond. And boy, people responded, people responded. And it was a lot of work. And I got a lot of support from John Darnell and Dunn because I was learning how to be a treasurer and how to get these grants out. So I know how to do an NPG, but we got $22,000 out the door within like a few weeks of being seated, and that our council had not spent that much in our community for years. So it was a huge accomplishment, and we were all really grateful for the support and the opportunity.
So Christine, you said you put out a call for grants, and in a minute, I want to understand what that call for grants actually looked like. But let's turn now to Ash Kramer from Greater Cypress Park. I will admit I take minutes for their neighborhood council, so I have a pretty good idea of their process. But I don't attend the committee meetings, and I'd like to understand what your call for grants looks like. How do you do that outreach?
Yeah, so
and tell us where Cypress Park is and who you are and all that stuff too.
So I'm the treasurer of the Cypress Park Neighborhood Council, and we are on just the other side of the river from Frogtown, Elysian Valley. So we are neighbors, about to be connected by a bridge, which is very exciting. And I've been the treasurer for about 4 or 5 years. And originally, when I started and sort of inherited our process, we would get, a trickle of applications throughout the year for all kinds of random things. And, but there were groups that came to us every year that, the council cared a lot about. And so often the conversation was about like, well, can we give money now if we know that in the future someone might come to us that we want to give money to more? And it was a weird conversation to have because we were like deciding on, future unknowns. So what we started to do was put out calls to local community-based organizations, our sort of regulars, historic regulars, and then, trying to expand it out to everyone we could think of, put it on social media. And we moved to a system of doing quarterly neighborhood purpose grants. So every 3 months, we'll gather everything. And we're so tiny, but there's only 9 members on our board. So we don't have a committee for NPGs. They just come to me, and then I type them all up. And what we found is helpful is rather than like taking everything as a one-off, should we fund this, should we not, we could have a conversation about within the context of all of these neighborhood purpose grants that are coming to us at this moment, where do we value, where are we going to get the most value for the community, sort of putting them in conversation together. Which is how we ultimately, and then the pandemic happened and all of that went out the window, and we were just like, how can we get food into our neighbors' hands? Which, if you were to ask me what the one word is, I would say flexibility, because there are so many things we are not allowed to directly fund as neighborhood councils, that one of the nice things about, I think, the purpose grants is that you can fund some things that you may want to fund, but not be able to because of, bureaucratic red tape.
So we do have 2 neighborhood empowerment advocates here in the room. So if we misspeak horribly about the rules, they're always welcome to chime in and set the record straight. But you said there are things that we can't fund. So Ash Kramer from Greater Cypress Park, what things are you thinking of when you say things we can't fund directly?
I'm thinking of like turkey giveaways. Remember there when everybody used to do turkey giveaways, and then one year they were like, actually, we're not allowed to directly use, public resources to give something that is of that much value to an individual. But if a nonprofit comes to you and they say, we're holding an event and our main thing is that we're doing turkey giveaways, that is okay.
So
is my understanding.
Bluetooth on my phone. Sorry, my Bluetooth on my phone took over. I'm turning it off now. I'm back. So that made me think of Dave Brown up in North Hills West, because you're talking about working with nonprofits. And I want to expand the conversation into partnerships, and then we'll go over to Matt, because I think he's going to have something to say about that. But Dave Brown described to me previously a partnership that they did around the community emergency response team training. So Dave, do you want to tell us a little bit about working with nonprofits and how you got around those rules to make a real impact in your community?
Sure. Hello, everybody. It was not a case of trying to get around anything, really. It was a case of keeping our eye focused on the final objective, and that being a very effective CERT, Community Emergency Response Training class. Let me give a brief preface.
And tell us where North Hills West is too, while you do.
Well, at the moment it's on the west side of the 405, essentially between Roscoe and Devonshire, for easy reckoning, the west side. However, the current redistricting commission seems to think it would be better suited to be in the Arleta-Pacoima area, so it can draw the potential campaign contributors from the current southwest corner of Council District 12 into the fold. But I digress. So we have these CERT classes in mind. How do we fund them? At the time, the fire department was teaching each CERT class. Well, a quick preface, the annual Valley Disaster Preparedness Fair, which we've been founding member now in its 14th year, was started by neighborhood councils, like 2 or 3 councils, $200 or $300 a piece for printing. It became a victim of its own success to the point where the last fair pre-COVID, we had over 7,000 attendees and an absurdly high budget, of which neighborhood council contributions became minuscule compared to larger outside grants, as Ash referred to. So fast forward, what can we do that's not going to kill us neighborhood council-wise? Funding and time involvement. Time involvement is huge for our neighborhood councils, because most people, even though they're retired, they have other time-consuming volunteer commitments, etc. So what we did is we leveraged the foundation, a not 501c3 nonprofit, as the NPG applicant for funds to a neighborhood council, and said, we'd like to, we've already got a CERT class in motion. We would like you to contribute to it and get a little skin in the game, advertise it, and ideally join it. We offer a bonus to the first neighborhood council, and it's a standing bonus, by the way. The first neighborhood council that is 100% board member certified, we're prize to be determined, of course, but trust me, it would be significant. Okay, so typical nowadays price, $100 for a CERT completion backpack. Okay, so you got 30 students in a typical class, so that's $3,000. So our approach to the neighbor council was the foundation.
What's in that backpack? What's in that backpack?
Oh,
just so
all
people
sorts
have
of
a
good
visual.
Stuff. Not the least, hard hat, goggles, gloves, face mask, several face masks, vinyl gloves in case you're in the midst of bloodborne pathogens, etc., and leather gloves in case you're in broken glass, pry bar, vest, reflective safety vest, and a nice backpack too.
So you want people trained in this CERT program that your neighborhood council believes in, and you want them to have the tools that they need so that they can serve their community. So that's something that's part of your neighborhood council culture. So you've taken steps to help fund that, which, as you said, has a high price tag. Continue.
And it's an admirable endeavor, and nobody ever says no, with the possible exception of when we're triaging available funds at the end of a fiscal year, because everybody shows up with their hat in their hand out of the woodwork that you don't hear from otherwise during the year. So net result is we've successfully did several CERT classes with neighbor and individual neighborhood councils as a 50% partner. They would contribute the foundation would submit the MPG to the neighborhood council, who would fund it. Before which, because there's a time lag on products, the foundation would order and have assembled the CERT kits ready to go. Okay, and we did that for a long time. We probably facilitated over 100 CERT classes. So how do you elevate that NPG wise? How do you engage more neighborhood councils in such a worthy endeavor? So we approached somebody that shall remain blameless, decided we should have a Spanish language CERT class because it's an underserved community, typically living in multiple unit dwellings who don't have the physical ergonomic means to prepare themselves. So what better thing to do than to give them the basic skills that they can carry between their ears as opposed to not having physical space to store stuff. Okay, anybody can put a backpack anywhere. Okay, so we approached several of the neighbor councils that are in a predominantly Spanish speaking area. The response was immediate and overwhelming. So we thought, okay, we got to go. Well, the fire department teaches CERT, and they had one bilingual CERT instructor, and he was busy and wasn't too keen. It didn't work. So we approached LAPD and said, hey, can we get a couple of bilingual officers to present a CERT class? We'll do everything for you, including setting up the projector screen and sweeping the floor at the end of everything. And but they weren't certified. So they approached Department of Homeland Security, became DHS certified as opposed to LAFD certified. So without any announcement, we had a oversubscribed Spanish language CERT class of like 50, 60 attendees, which set a record for attendance quantity in that description, as well as 100% completion rate. Everybody that started finished. So I mentioned elevating the procedure. So we thought, well, let's do this bigger. We approached Kaiser facility in Van Nuys, who has a huge meeting room, and said, listen, we'd like to do a monster Spanish language CERT class with multiple neighborhood councils. Okay, you see where this is going. And we ended up with a total of 4 neighborhood councils, each contributing approximately 25%. To make a long story short, the foundation ended up subsidizing the operation because, sometimes the neighbor MPG doesn't work for whatever reason. Somebody lost a treasure, but it worked so well that the city of LA actually stood up, took notice of it, particularly the neighborhood council involvement. Multiple neighborhood councils joining forces on a project actually woke up a sleeping, not a tiger, but it disturbed the kitten, the city kitten, perhaps. And unfortunately, we failed to follow up on that.
Well, it sounds like it was quite an undertaking, and I think you certainly shall not be blamed for having brought neighborhood councils together to do joint NPGs and engage in such a ambitious endeavor. So I'd like to actually hear from Matt Wersinger at Del Rey, and of course I'm going to ask you to tell us where Del Rey is. But some of the themes that have come up are culture in terms of what's important to a neighborhood council to fund, and then partnerships too, and ongoing programs. And you've talked a little bit about that in our preparation. So maybe you can tell us how those or any of the other topics that we've talked about today resonate with Del Rey.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Conrad. I've been on the council out here for 8 years. We are not Playa del Rey, we are not Marina del Rey, we are Del Rey, which is nestled adjacent to the two, however, is neither of them. About a half of our budget goes to outreach, about a third goes specifically to MPGs. And I think the beauty in MPGs, the way that I see them, is that third that's going to specifically MPGs also doubles as outreach, because everything that we do when we put an MPG out is not only helping people within our community, but trying to see how we can expand the voice and the awareness of our council. And I think that that's really critical to them. Our NPGs generally go out to longstanding partners. We have community, service groups that we've been working with our council's been around for 18 years. We've probably been working with some of them just as long as that is. Over at Mar Vista Gardens, we have a number of organizations over there, the Boys and Girls Club, the Helper Foundation, all of these organizations that help the kids over there. And we're always really eager to get out and sponsor events, sponsor scholarships to them. Much like other people did, we sponsored food during the pandemic. And in doing so, we make sure that, if we're going to sponsor an event, they're going to print t-shirts, our name's going to go on the t-shirt. I think that things like that may seem really small, but help parents and other stakeholders then understand who we are in the community and that we have a role in this. The other thing, and I think Dave kind of touched on this, is that what you then do is formulate those partnerships and take them to the next level, where another organization we work with in Delray all the time is Moa Wellness, and we have given them a lot of money for events that they've done or community giveaways. In turn, they partnered with us and spearheaded the Great Streets Initiative that we just won. We were also looking for a place this summer to locate a homeless outreach activity modeled on Sela on the east side. And that has begun. And who do we go to? We went to Moa Wellness, a group that we have partnered with in so many ways. And the last thing that I think, Dave, you also touched on is that you then begin to raise the profile of all the organizations involved, where that same event I'm just talking about now, through us donating some money to it, through us co-locating it with someone that we've worked with on MPGs in the past, we now bring in other deeper pocketed nonprofits who are going to be able to donate not the $1,000, $1,500 that we're able to give, but organizations that can drop $50,000, $100,000 towards events and activities. And so it becomes a snowball effect. And I think everything kind of comes together in that. And that's how we really view our NPGs.
So thank you so much, Matt. And so Ash, Christine, and Dave, and let's go to Ash and Christine first. Do you have any examples of how outreach is a tie-in for your NPG process, how you try and bring recognition back to the neighborhood council, as Matt was talking about, making sure that your name is associated with the taxpayer dollars that you decide, to what they go to fund. And I'll just let you jump in. And Christine, your background looks great, by the way.
Oh, my son had to sign into a Zoom, so I've lost all my proprietary images. So it's just me in the garage.
That's great. Well, Ash, do you want to tell us anything?
Sure,
Yeah.
I have a couple of thoughts on this. One is towards Christine, because on top of being the treasurer of the neighborhood council, I'm also a board member of a separate nonprofit that is the Friends of the Cypress Park Library, which received a more generous than I expected grant from Elysian Valley, because we share a library. And one of the things we did was make sure we had a book plate. So we bought a ton of books and we put a book plate in it with, saying it was a gift of the Elysian Valley Neighborhood Council, which is great because a ton of kids' books, a lot of Spanish books in Spanish, so that people, every time they check out a book, they'll see right there that it was a gift of the neighborhood council and get it out that way. And then my other thought about this was something that we do. So much of what we do is so hyper local. Like the groups that we tend to fund are often groups of parents from the neighborhoods who may not have an official nonprofit. They themselves may not be an official nonprofit, but they will partner with a nonprofit in the neighborhood who will serve as a fiscal sponsor for them. So we'll fund Mujeres de la Tierra, but it'll be Acción Comunitaria, who's actually like hosting a weekly food giveaway every week. And I think what happens is so much of it then becomes word of mouth. I don't care as much that there's a sticker on the bag that says it, because the conversations that those groups are having really brings all of these people to the meeting who are benefiting from the organizations.
And maybe to paint the picture in even greater detail, just tell us a little bit about these highly active community groups. I mean, I think you've touched on it, but during the pandemic, I've seen kind of what you're talking about. Maybe you could just give us some more detail.
Sure. So there's Teresa Roman is on our board, and she is a board member of this group of, it's a group of moms and community activists. And there's maybe 10 or 15 moms who every week go out, buy a ton of food. She literally has this happen in her front yard of her apartment building. They have this whole system. They know, 115, 120 people show up every week, get a box of groceries and, cleaning supplies. And they have, but they don't have that, going through the process of becoming an official nonprofit is expensive, challenging. There are all kinds of language barriers. So fortunately, there are other groups in the neighborhood who've supported them. Buried Under the Blue, Mujeres de la Tierra. They've done events before with Children's Hospital has sponsored them, and to serve as that kind of layer of official paperwork. And then, but then it's really the people who are doing all the work are very much members of the community. And there are several groups like that in the neighborhood who will come to us regularly and request funding in partnership with another group.
So would it be safe to say that the NPG process has made Greater Cypress Park Neighborhood Council more familiar with sort of the lay of the land and the groups that are out there and actively engaging, and maybe have been doing so for quite some time?
Absolutely. I think that that's very much accurate to say, and has brought those people in. I mean, so Alexia Tehran, who was a longtime neighborhood council founding member of our neighborhood council, and I'm sure there are people on this call who know her, who sadly passed away at the beginning of this year. She was always like, she would grill people when they came to ask for money and be like, why am I only seeing you at this meeting? You only show up when your hat is in your hand and you want some money. You need to come to all of our meetings, because this is what, where we build community. And if you only show up for money, I'm not interested in giving you money. And I think that spirit, we try and like bring that forward. And it has been really effective. I think a lot of organizations show up more regularly, engage in conversations, and suddenly it's not just about, we want to have this one, Dia de los Niños event. Actually, oh, you're talking about street safety. We actually all care about that, and I'm connected to so-and-so. And the conversations become better when people are engaged and not just there to collect a paycheck, or not paycheck.
So thank you, Ash Kramer from Greater Cypress Park. Let's remind our audience that we can take questions, and I would in fact invite anyone to raise their hand if they want to chime in with a story that they think resonates with this topic, how they're working with through the NPG program to foster relationships with other community organizations, for example, or if you have questions for our presenters. But until we see some hands, and of course you can put it in the chat too, we'll continue and I'll throw questions our presenters' way. And presenters, feel free to jump in and ask one another questions too, if you like. I was going to ask Christine, I don't recall how new a board member you are. Maybe you said you're relatively new on Elysian Valley, and I just wondered about, you're brand new. Okay, so then let's ask you, because oftentimes when you're new and ambitious, you learn very quickly, where the faux pas are, what the pitfalls are, and we put that in our title. What are some of the pitfalls of the NPG program? Not to put you on the spot or put you in an uncomfortable political conversation, but is there anything that you've learned from this rapid fire round of your first term on the neighborhood council that might be a word to the wise for other neighborhood council members as they make their NPG plans for this fiscal year?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what was interesting is that we had to do everything so fast, right? And one of the things I ran into personally, and I wasn't the only one, because that we have a whole lot of new women in particular elected to our council. And I just want to say it's the first time we have an all-female executive board on our council. And we're just trying to still do the outreach to build our whole council up, like to have people who show up regularly, and that we have a full voting board and active members. But I will just say, like, when you come from a background of activism, or just being involved, I started years ago, I started a community organization called LA River Communities for Environmental Equity that's focused on just tracking the pollution from Metrolink, advocating for clean air. We partnered through the Coalition for Clean Air. We got air sensors put in Cypress Park and in Elysian Valley, circling the Metrolink facility. So I've been doing those kinds of things as an individual, right? And also back in 2016, a neighbor of mine, an elderly neighbor, was struck and had a severe head injury while she was walking on the LA River Greenway shared path, which I intentionally call by its real name, not a bike path, the LA River Greenway shared path where people get to walk. And she was in the ICU, hugely injured, life-threatening injuries from being struck by a bicycle. So I started this Elysian Valley Slow Ride that we did, and we had a lot of collaborators over the years. So when it came to this grant funding, you know, you do outreach to everyone you can think of, but some of those people are people you've worked with before. And I got a very fast crash course, and it's fascinating in just like getting a hold of the city attorney and saying, what do I do? Like 3 years ago, I did a bike ride with this organization, or 2 years ago, this author came and like shared on our, you know, talked about mountain lions to us at a coffee shop. Like when you have a wide reach, it just becomes an interesting thing to know your own rights and be ready to recuse if you need to. And we were
So you're talking about conflict of interest, right?
Conflict of interest and knowing what they are. And at the same time, what I really appreciated from the city attorney was she was emphatic, like you don't just like it shouldn't be like count against you that you're involved in your community, right? Like being very clear what your role is, what your role has been, what your role is right now, you know, and clear when it's appropriate to recuse and when you don't need to. And you know, we have a lot of moms on our board, and we all have kids in public schools. So just, you know, being very clear, like, oh, we're funding a garden at this school, and we're funding the nonprofit that's doing the garden, not the school itself. Like, you know, just understanding the subtle nuances, because prior to our taking term, like there had been a lot of grants rejected for conflict of interest by the previous council. And like my proudest thing was just that every single one of our grants got green check marks, right? Like we all, everything went through, except we have one that the fundees decided not to pursue. They didn't want to continue. But it just was such a satisfying experience to do that extra work and be very thorough, just to be thorough, right? And
so what you're
making sure your outreach was not that you're not just reaching out like to the people you know, that you're finding new groups to reach, right?
What I'm hearing is just because you're involved in other groups doesn't mean that you should automatically not suggest that they fill out an NPG, but find out from the city attorney whether you do need to recuse or whether there is a conflict of interest. Right. I mean, we hear at a lot of neighborhood council meetings, if the city attorney has advised you to recuse on any matter, you know, to let us know. And then, you know, some people will probably think, well, I've had my ringer on all day and I haven't gotten a single call from the city attorney. Well, you have to actually ask them the question. They don't know what you're doing automatically. So Dave and Matt, go ahead, proceed.
One little thing for anyone who's like, I mean, as a new person, there's a lot to learn quickly, but you know, in general, the president of your council is your legal representative, and they're the only one who's interacting with the city attorney, except in matters of conflict of interest, in which case they are directly speaking to you. So I was on the phone with our city attorney rep for 45 minutes, you know, prior to our grant funding meeting, and it was really informative, you know, it's really informative.
That's great.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit more about outreach. I think it was, let's see. Well, Matt was saying that your budget is about 1/2 outreach and about 1/3 NPGs, and obviously there's some overlap there. I think it'd be interesting to get a sense of what your NPG announcement process is. You know, do you leave your window open for the entire fiscal year? Do you have just sections of the year? And do you do any formal outreach, or are your long-lasting relationships, your long-standing relationships enough?
Yeah, I mean, there's no shortage of people who are here in our community and could use money, big or small. But most of our relationships, as I described, going back so long, tend to be the ones that we look at each year and have a recurring process with them. We can outline in our budget, when we do it in July of each year, we can probably allocate 80–90% of our MPGs right up front, knowing that these are the things that we've traditionally given to. We can have a discussion, as we will every year in our committee, about whether or not we want to just roll those over. But so much of that for us comes from that process. We have a pretty informal and rolling process beyond that. So we are open to other people coming in and upending it, and we'll always consider it. And I think the amounts shift around as we go. For example, this year we've gotten, and Dave, you'll love this, we've gotten very involved with the emergency preparedness in Delray. And we've partnered with the fire department and actually with our residents association as well and I've been hosting events and buying radios. So that's new to us. What we've been able to do is to continue some of the other partnerships and obviously looking at what's in person, what's not. Some things have shifted. So I think what Ash said at the beginning about being flexible is so critical to this process, because it's got to remain something that you look at on a month by month basis and understand, especially in these times, what's happening and what's not. But just to go back to your original question, like I said, it's a very malleable process for us. It's relatively informal. We happen to have a treasurer, Daniel Perez, who a lot of you know, who is running this Congress, who is excellent at it, understands the rules, and has also, alongside me, been doing this for a long time on our board. So I think that some of that stability helps to be able to answer the questions of some of the newer members.
And actually, we received a question from the chat. How much money typically do NCs get for these grants? And so, Dave, maybe you can give us an answer to that question.
Oh, that's all over the map. It depends on.
Okay, you've been in the NC system for a little while. So what have you seen in your areas and neighborhood councils you've participated with?
On a routine basis. So our North Hills West does similar to Ash and Christine with their libraries. It's called a Book of the Month Club, where they buy a case or two of whatever is anticipated to be the hot book that month. The neighborhood council gets their logo with website address on the logo on each book. And we thought about adding little neighborhood council place marks, because who's going to sit down and read a book from cover to cover? A little place mark that when they turn the book in, they keep the place mark, and it's got the neighborhood council contact information on it going forward. But a main thing we try to do is avoid, aside from the basic accountability that everything is proper, we really go out of our way to try to avoid duplication of city services. In other words, think trimming trees. What neighbor council hasn't been approached about fixing a sidewalk or a pothole or getting a tree trimmed, right? Well, our tax is already paid.
You're not going to go buy a speed hump from a catalog and install that.
Well,
Dave, I had to jump in. Believe it or not, we're being told that we have to shut this room down any minute now. So I told you guys time would fly. So I guess let me just go back to all of our panelists. Is there any last word that you really wanted to get in? Like 10 seconds each, I'll give you. And if not, we'll let the guys shut the Zoom down.
Conrad, I'll just say that, yeah, there's a way to get a lot of things done. And we've just again, we've alluded to it. There's a way to get the money out to your community. Don't give up. Even if you get an MPG kicked back, talk to people, try again. There's ways that it'll work.
I see nods from Ash and Dave and Christine. So I guess that's a great note to leave this on. Thank you everybody for joining Neighborhood Purposes Grants. We look forward to having a continuation of this conversation in the future. We'll see you at the next session. Okay. And fill out the survey, and you can save the chat hopefully by clicking the 3 dots if you want to. Thanks everyone.